Almost a year ago when I first started this channel, the first ever video that I created was a run of Pokemon Red and Blue with just a Nidoking. And needless to say, a lot has changed since then, the most important of which is that my rule set for completing these runs is quite a bit different now than it was all that time ago. So because of that, I'd say it's time to come full circle with an updated Nidoking run, and what better way to do that than to pit Nidoking against his twin sister, Nidoqueen. My name's Vanman, and today, we're racing Nidoking versus Nidoqueen to test who can beat Pokemon Red and Blue the fastest. The rules for this challenge are in the description below, but in summary, I can only use Nidoking or Nidoqueen in battle with no battle items, I can't use any glitches or RNG manipulation, I must save before boss battles and then reset if I lose, and finally, the winner of today's race will be determined by the real-world time that each Pokemon spends completing the game while playing at 4 times speed. Nidoking and Nidoqueen are extremely similar Pokemon, with an identical base stat total of 410, and an almost identical move pool with extremely diverse type coverage, giving them access to super effective attacks against almost every Pokemon in the game. However, there are some key differences, one of which being that Nidoking's stats are more offensively spread with higher speed and attack, and Nidoqueen's stats are more defensively spread with higher HP and defense. And upon asking you all who you thought would win this race, the vast majority of you said that Nidoking would come out on top, and I can understand why you answered that way, because one of the surest paths to success in a solo challenge run such as this one is to consistently outspeed and one-shot your opponent, which is something that Nidoking's stats would suggest you will do slightly more often than Nidoqueen. Not to mention Nidoking is the Pokemon of choice when it comes to unmodified speed runs, but it's important to keep in mind that those speed runs evolve Nidoking from Nidoran, therefore giving it a different starting moveset, and those speed runs permit the use of items in battle, whereas items in battle are banned in this run. So no X-accuracy horn drill for us today. In today's race, we'll award a crown to the victor to declare him or her the true king or queen of Pokemon challenges. And just to mix things up, there are not one but 2 crowns up for grabs. First, we'll do a single run of each Pokemon and award the first crown to the winner of the first attempt only. Then we'll do some follow-up runs and award the second crown to the Pokemon who can complete the game the fastest after the runs have been optimized. As a challenge for the viewer, everyone comment down below your prediction for who you think will win this race, as well as each Pokemon's final time of completion. Then when the video is over, come back and edit your comment to describe how accurate your prediction was. And in addition to commenting, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another video. And feel free to show your support on Patreon. So, will Nidoking satisfy everyone's expectations and win the competition, or will Nidoqueen come through with a surprise upset and come out on top? Only one way to find out. Since the Pokemon to go second in the race will get the advantage of having learned from the previous Pokemon's run, and since it seems like Nidoqueen is the underdog here, our first contestant in the lineup will be Nidoking. To kick off the run, Nidoking begins by taking out the rival's Bulbasaur with a couple Thrash attacks, which is an incredibly powerful 90 base power move that lasts for 3 to 4 turns, and is also one of the small handful of moves that Nidoking learns that Nidoqueen doesn't. Then after defeating the rival, Nidoking uses Thrash to one-shot all the wild encounters from Route 1 leading to Viridian Forest, at which point we make quick work of all the bug catchers for experience in preparation for Brock. However, by the time we defeat those trainers, plus the junior trainer in the Pewter Gym, that only brings us to level 12, and unfortunately I think Nidoking will need to be at least level 15 to defeat Brock, since our most powerful moves, Thrash and Horn Attack, are resisted by his team. So because of that, it's time to head south to Viridian Forest to train. But that actually doesn't take nearly as long as you might think, because both Nidoking and Nidoqueen are part of what's called the medium-slow experience group, which, despite the name, is the group that actually requires the least amount of experience to get from one level to the next in the early game, allowing Nidoking to reach level 15 in just over 5 minutes, at which point we head to face Brock. And given that Nidoking doesn't have any status moves, our strategy here is just to spam Horn Attack against Geodude, which Geodude obviously resists, but it still inflicts sizable damage thanks to Nidoking's high attack stat, and we even managed to open with a critical hit. And since Geodude only used a couple tackles, and spent the rest of its time spamming Defense Curl, we take Geodude down in 7 hits with high green health remaining for Onix. And against Onix, our strategy is the same, except that when Onix goes for Bide, we switch to the much weaker Poison Sting so as to take back less damage upon the retaliation attack. And using this strategy, Nidoking and Onix go back and forth trading Horn Attacks for tackles, and thanks to a couple more critical hit Horn Attacks, we take out the Onix for a decisive victory and win the Boulder Badge in only 6 minutes and 15 seconds. So now, let's see how Nidoqueen handles the Brock split. Well, to start, Nidoqueen begins with a much different starting moveset whose principal attacking move is Body Slam, which is an impressive 85 power in comparison to 65 for Horn Attack. However, Nidoqueen still doesn't have access to Thrash, which means that the first rival's Bulbasaur goes down in 3 hits instead of 2, which by the way is one major advantage that Nidoking has over Nidoqueen, in that sometimes Nidoqueen spends one additional turn to knock out each Pokemon, which is lost time that really adds up over the course of the run. However, one major advantage that Nidoqueen has over Nidoking is that her starting moveset allows her to to defeat Brock at a much lower level, because Nidoqueen begins with Tail Whip to lower the opponent's defense stat. So in the battle against Brock, not only can we open with a few Tail Whips against Geodude to make the following Body Slams more potent, but Body Slam also has a 30% chance to paralyze, and since Brock has a total of 5 full heals that he will use without discretion if his Pokemon are inflicted with a status condition, the fact that we do indeed paralyze Geodude one time means that Brock essentially wastes an entire turn to administer the full heal, allowing us to take out the Geodude in only 4 hits with green health remaining for Onix. And against Onix, our plan is to open with a few Tail Whips followed by Body Slam just like against Geodude, but then also use Tail Whip whenever Onix goes for Bide so we don't take any damage in return. However, in this particular battle, Onix never actually uses Bide, meaning that between its screeches and tackles, it manages to chip us down to red health, but still, our Tail Whips allow Body Slam to take out the Onix on only 5 hits, and win us the Boulder Badge in only 3 minutes and 32 seconds, almost 3 minutes ahead of Nidoking's time. So it looks like Nidoking has his work cut out for him if he wants to catch up. Luckily for him though, Thrash is more than enough to take out very nearly every Pokemon from Route 3 to Mount Moon in a single hit. And not to mention, since Thrash only uses a single power point for its entire 3 to 4 turn cycle, that means that after defeating Brock, we don't even have to heal at the Poké Center in Pewter City or at the entrance to Mount Moon. Then upon arriving in Cerulean City, as powerful as Nidoking is, I still don't think he's quite ready to contend with Misty's super effective water type attacks. So instead we head to face Rival 2. And although yes, technically we could lose this fight if the opening Pidgeotto gets off a long series of sand attacks to lower our accuracy, in this case Pidgeotto just uses a quick attack before being 2-shot, after which Horn Attack one-shots Abra, Thrash one-shots Rattata, and Bulbasaur just survives on a sliver before going down on the next turn. And then again, just like Route 3 leading to Mount Moon, Nidoking rides his abundance of Thrash power points all the way through Nugget Bridge leading to Bill's house. Then after completing Nugget Bridge and acquiring the SS ticket from Bill, since I still want to delay the Misty fight as long as possible, we instead head straight to the SSN where we pick up the TM for Body Slam and then face Rival 3, who is exactly as trivial as the previous rival was. Then up next, we would normally head to the Vermilion Gym to face Lieutenant Surge, but since the gym is walled off behind a cut tree and we need Misty's Cascade Badge to use cut outside of battle, we unfortunately have to dig back to Cerulean City to defeat her first, meaning that later we'll have to waste time by backtracking to Vermilion to face Surge. But now against Misty, fortunately we're overleveled enough that Misty Staryu goes down to a single Body Slam, then Thrash does about half to Starmie, then Starmie deals massive damage with a critical hit Bubble Beam before going down to one more Thrash attack, winning us both the Cascade Badge and the TM for Bubble Beam, which will be a great coverage move for all the various Rock and Fire type Pokemon in the next portion of the game. And now, because we're already in Cerulean City, we don't bother walking all the way back down to Vermilion just yet, and we instead head east through Route 9 and Rock Tunnel, which of course never presents Nidoking with any sort of roadblock. Really, the only part of this route that even approaches a challenge is that there are a couple Slowpokes along the way that know Confusion, and can deal super effective damage given Nidoking's poison typing. But Nidoking's special stat is bulky enough that he can tank the attacks no problem. Then after exiting the cave and arriving in Celadon City, we complete our usual shopping errands in the Celadon department store, where we also pick up the TM for Ice Beam. However, I decide not to teach it just yet because I'm not quite certain that we'll ever actually need it. But in a first attempt run, better safe than sorry. Then after completing the shopping, we pick up the Etchum for Fly, but then because we don't yet have Surge's Thunder Badge to use Fly outside of battle, we have to walk all the way through Saffron City back to Vermilion City to defeat him. And I think it should be pretty obvious that Surge doesn't stand a chance here, because in the battle, Voltorb and Pikachu go down on one hit, but not before Pikachu insists on getting in a quick attack that does all of 4 damage, and then Raichu does barely hang on the red, but then it just goes for a useless growl before fainting, winning us the Thunder Badge. Now, at this point you might be wondering why exactly I defeated Lieutenant Surge now and not later, and that's because upon his defeat he gifts us with the TM for Thunderbolt, which is extremely useful against Rival 4, so because of that we fly to Lavender Town to face him next, and it's in this battle that Nidoking's diverse move pool really shines, because the Pidgeotto and Gyarados are both weak to electric attacks, meaning they're both one-shot with Thunderbolt, then Growlithe is one-shot with a super effective Bubble Beam, then although we don't actually have any super effective moves against the next 2 Pokemon, our attack stat is still strong enough to one-shot them both for our first flawless victory of the run yet, placing Nidoking's Rival 4 split at 24 minutes and 6 seconds. So, Nidoking has done exceptionally well in the run so far. Was it enough to surpass Nidoqueen, or does Nidoking still lag behind? Let's see. Well, between Pewter City and Celadon City, the routing for Nidoqueen is almost exactly the same as it was for Nidoking, with the exception that Nidoqueen, because of Body Slam only having 15 power points, has to waste just a little bit of time by healing at the Poké Centers in Pewter City, Route 3 at the entrance to Mount Moon, and Route 9 at the entrance to Rock Tunnel, whereas Nidoking didn't have to heal at any of those places. Also, after making quick work of Rival 2, there were a handful of trainers on Nugget Bridge leading to Bill's House that were 2-shots for Nidoqueen, whereas Nidoking was able to 1-shot literally everything. And additionally, Nidoqueen didn't have enough Body Slam power points to make it all the way across the bridge to Bill's house, and therefore had to backtrack to heal yet again. However, given that Nidoqueen began the run with such a strong lead, she's still ahead of Nidoking by just under a minute at the Rival 4 split. However, Nidoking is making up his lost time fast, so it's still anyone's race. Then up next, after both Nidoking and Nidoqueen complete the Lavender Tower mission to acquire the Pokeflute, both Pokemon head down to Safari Zone to feast on the precious vitamins there and pick up the HM for Surf, then head immediately over to Silphco to feast on the vitamins there, and also pick up the TM for Earthquake, thus drastically enhancing their already formidable type coverage and sweeping capabilities. So now, after acquiring both Surf and Earthquake, the next boss battle to contend with is Koga, who for both Pokemon is a complete cinch thanks to their type advantage, because in the battle, Coughing is 1-shot with Earthquake, then although Muk's defense is so high that it's just shy of a 1-shot in the case of Nidoqueen, its move pool is nevertheless so unthreatening that Nidoqueen is not in any danger before Muk goes down in the next turn. Then obviously the next Coughing is 1-shot, and funny enough, Weezing is guaranteed to use Self Destruct thanks to Koga's AI that prevents Weezing from using any of its Poison-type moves against a Poison-type Pokemon because of the type resistance. So as long as we can survive Weezing's attack, we're guaranteed to win on the next turn, which is exactly what happens to win both Nidoking and Nidoqueen the Soul Badge. And now, the reason that we defeated Koga so soon, instead of any other boss trainer in the game, is because Koga's Soul Badge grants us the ability to use Surf outside of battle to surf down to Cinnabar Island, where we then feast on all the vitamins found in the Pokemon Mansion, then use our type advantage to very quickly gain some much needed experience by 1-shotting all the Cinnabar gym trainers, followed by Blaine himself. But in the battle against Blaine, although you might expect us to outspeed and 1-shot everything with Earthquake, we are a full 5 points underleveled in comparison to Blaine's Arcanine. So it does manage to hang on by a thread, but in Nidoking's case knocks itself out from the recoil of Takedown, and in Nidoqueen's case just decides to roar, which has no effect in battle, and then goes down in the next turn, winning us the Volcano Badge. Then after defeating Blaine, we head to the Celadon Gym to face Erica, and at this point we're so overleveled that we outspeed and 1-shot the whole team, using Earthquake for Victory Bell, followed by Blizzard, the TM for which we picked up in the Pokemon Mansion against Tangela, and then another Earthquake for Vileplume, winning us the Rainbow Badge. Then after defeating Erica, Sabrina is walled off behind Rival 5, and Giovanni is walled off behind Sabrina. So for our next several boss battles, we have no choice about which order we face them. Fortunately though, our now complete move roster of Thunderbolt, Surf, Earthquake, and Blizzard offers enough type coverage to deal super effective damage against literally every Pokemon for the entire rest of the game, with the exception of the handful of pure Psychic type Pokemon on the Rival and Sabrina's teams. So against Rival 5, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen managed to dodge the opening Pidgeot Sand attack by 1-shotting it with Blizzard. Then we take care of Gyarados with Thunderbolt, followed by Growlithe with Earthquake. Then although we don't have a super effective attack against Alakazam, its defense is so weak that Earthquake still knocks it out. And then although Venusaur is weak to Ice type attacks, its special status so high that for both Nidoking and Nidoqueen it actually survives a Blizzard, but then deals very little damage in return before going down to another Earthquake. But now up next is Sabrina, and not since Misty have we faced against a gym leader with a distinct type advantage, and just like with Misty, we've delayed Sabrina as long as possible, but now we have nowhere else to go besides to the Saffron Gym to face against her. So, will we be able to dodge all the super effective Psychic type attacks to get past Sabrina, or will this battle be our first major sticking point of the run? Well, to test that, we'll start with Nidoking, and in this battle, our strategy is just to spam Earthquake, and given that we're a full 8 points overleveled, we outspeed and 1-shot Kadabra, followed by Mr. Mime and Venomoth. However, we're only 3 levels above the Alakazam, and as you know, Alakazam is one of the fastest Pokemon in the game. But as it turns out, this Alakazam speed is still no match for Nidoking's, who 1-shots Alakazam as well for yet another flawless victory. However, Nidoqueen is a slower Pokemon than Nidoking, so how will she fare against Sabrina? Well, to start, again because we're so overleveled, Kadabra, Mr. Mime, and Venomoth all go down without a hitch, but then against Alakazam, yes, Nidoqueen outspeeds and 1-shots as well, winning us the Marsh Badge. Then up next, although obviously neither Nidoking nor Nidoqueen have any trouble with the final gym leader in the form of Giovanni, because we outspeed and 1-shot his entire team with either Surf or Earthquake, now we have only 6 more battles of the run, several of which have Pokemon on their teams that could actually pose a serious threat. And first up on that list is Rival 6. And just like with Sabrina, our chances of winning this fight will depend mostly on whether we outspeed the Alakazam. And yes, it's really just the Alakazam that's the problem, because the opening Pidgeot will always use Agility because of its AI thinking that the Psychic type move is super effective against our Poison typing. And we have access to super effective type coverage against the Rhyhorn, Gyarados, and Growlithe, which are all 1-shot. But then out comes Alakazam. And does Nidoking outspeed? Yes, he does, and Alakazam goes down to a critical hit Earthquake. Then up next is Venusaur, and although it tanks a Blizzard just like in the Rival 5 fight, the next Vine Whip does almost nothing and Venusaur goes down on the next turn, placing Nidoking's Rival 6 split at 42 minutes and 18 seconds. So now, let's check on Nidoqueen and see how she handled Rival 6. Well, to start, again Pidgeot is a free win thanks to its spamming agility, followed by a super effective one-shot for Rhyhorn, Gyarados, and Growlithe. But then, thanks to Nidoqueen's lower speed stat in comparison to Nidoking's, Alakazam then moves first, but thankfully just uses Reflect instead of attacking. However, that's a double-edged sword because now Earthquake only deals about half damage and gives Alakazam a chance to retaliate with a devastating Psybeam to bring us into orange health. But thankfully the next Earthquake powers through the Reflect and knocks out the Alakazam. And then finally Venusaur goes down to a couple Blizzards to place Nidoqueen's Rival 6 split at 40 minutes and 10 seconds. And now, it might seem as though Nidoqueen has pulled ahead of Nidoking even further, but at this point in the run Nidoking had already acquired the HM for Strength from Fuchsia City, and Nidoqueen had not, which means that Nidoqueen now needs to backtrack to go grab Strength in preparation for Victory Road. So, after completing the Boulder puzzle and making it to the Indigo Plateau, let's check our competitors' Victory Road splits. Alright, so in this run, Nidoqueen has managed to maintain her lead ahead of Nidoking by just over a minute. So, if Nidoking wants to win this race, he will have to hope that Nidoqueen will stumble through one or more of the Elite Four members while he wins his battles on the first attempt. And realistically, the very first Elite Four member Lorelei is the strongest contender for deciding the outcome of this race, because her Pokemon are extremely bulky and have access to powerful super effective moves to knock us out, so she could easily skew the end result of this race in either direction. And unfortunately, since neither Nidoking nor Nidoqueen have access to any setup moves, our only strategy is to brute force the battle by spamming Thunderbolt and hoping for the best. So now, let's see how Nidoking fares against Lorelei. To start, Dewgong's AI is a coin flip to use either Rest or Aurora Beam, and obviously Rest is preferable since Aurora Beam would deal massive damage. But it turns out in this case, our first Thunderbolt lands a critical hit to bring Dewgong down to Super Potion range. Then after Lorelei uses a Super Potion, the next Thunderbolt leaves it hanging on by a thread as well, prompting yet another Super Potion. Then Dewgong goes down on the next turn. Then against Cloyster, the first Thunderbolt does just over half and also paralyzes, but then Cloyster breaks through the paralysis and deals about half with Aurora Beam before the next Thunderbolt takes it out. Then although Slowbro's AI could have it use either Amnesia or Withdraw, it instead goes for the worst of all possible moves in the form of Water Gun before being two-shot with Thunderbolt. And then, although Jinx is one-shot with a critical hit Earthquake, Lapras is so bulky that a super effective Thunderbolt doesn't even deal half, and then a super effective Hydro Pump is more than enough to knock us out. So, considering that our Thunderbolt deals so little damage to both Lapras and Dewgong, I'll go ahead and feed Nidoking all 10 of our rare candies to get him to level 59 before we attempt the fight again. Well, this time, a non-critical hit Thunderbolt deals over half to Dewgong, and then thankfully instead of Aurora Beam, it just heals back up to full with Rest, giving us the free knockout in the next 2 turns while it stays asleep. Then against Cloyster, even despite our higher level, it just hangs on by a thread and then retaliates with a devastating Clamp to deal just over half. And to add insult to injury, Lorelei even uses a Super Potion while we're trapped in the Clamp, because yes, the trainers can do that in Gen 1. But then finally, after we break free of the Clamp, Cloyster goes down in the next turn. Then Slowbro again hits us with Water Gun before going down, then Jinx is one shot, but then Lapras survives Thunderbolt just like last time, and then knocks us out with Blizzard. However, in the next attempt, Dewgong again uses Rest before being two-shot with Thunderbolt, but then unlike last time, Cloyster doesn't attack, and instead heals with a Super Potion before going down in the next turn, meaning that for the first time we go into Slowbro at full health. Well, again Slowbro uses Water Gun, but then after we get past Jinx and go into Lapras, we're now at high enough health that we can survive the Blizzard in the red, and knock out Lapras with one final Thunderbolt in the next turn. Then, I don't think it should be any surprise that Bruno is a free win, because Onyx is one shot with Surf, then Hitmonchan is one shot with Earthquake. Oh, wait a minute. No, it's not. I guess I really should have used a special move in that situation, since Hitmonchan's special is so much worse than its defense. Then Hitmonchan retaliates with Ice Punch, and although it doesn't deal much damage, we still could have lost a battle in that situation, because Ice Punch has a chance to freeze. But it doesn't freeze, and Hitmonchan goes down in the next turn. Then Earthquake also two-shots Hitmonlee with it using a high jump kick. Then the second Onyx is one-shot, as is Machamp thanks to a critical hit Earthquake. And then up next we have Agatha, and the very reason that Agatha can be so much trouble for so many Pokemon is because her Gengars are fast and can disrupt your entire game plan by inflicting you with sleep and confusion. However, one downside of her team is that her Pokemon are also very frail on the defensive front. So, if we can manage to be even faster than the Gengars, we'll be able to sweep her entire team, which is exactly what happens because the first Gengar goes down to Earthquake, Golbat goes down to Blizzard, Haunter goes down to Earthquake, Arbok goes down to Earthquake, and then the second Gengar goes down to Earthquake for another flawless victory. Then against Lance, the only threatening Pokemon on his team is Gyarados, because if Gyarados outspeeds, it will be able to knock us out with Hydro Pump. But if we manage to get past Gyarados, Lance's Dragonairs and Dragonite will always spam either Agility or Barrier for the exact same reason as Rival 6's Pidgeot, making them a free win. So, let's head to Lance and see how we fare against the Gyarados. Well, it turns out that we do outspeed the Gyarados and knock it out with a 4 times effective Thunderbolt. Then we take out the 2 Dragonairs for free as expected. Then Aerodactyl, being the Pokemon tied for the second highest speed stat in the game, obviously outspeeds and then deals very little damage with Takedown, after which a critical hit Blizzard knocks it out, followed by a Blizzard on the Dragonite for a Lance split of 49 minutes and 22 seconds. So now, before we get to Nidoking's champion battle, let's see how Nidoqueen handles Lorelei. Well, to prepare for the battle, I go ahead and feed Nidoqueen all 10 rare candies from the onset before even attempting Lorelei at the lower level like we did with Nidoking, bringing us to level 59. To begin against a Dugong, the initial Thunderbolt deals just over half, and then it retaliates with Aurora Beam to deal about a third, then goes down to the next Thunderbolt. Then unlike with Nidoking, Nidoqueen one-shots Cloyster with Thunderbolt, and considering that Nidoqueen and Nidoking have the same special stat, that indicates that Cloyster must have survived on a range against Nidoking. Then we get a clutch critical hit against Slowbro for the knockout, followed by a knockout on Jinx as well. But against Lapras, Dugong's Aurora Beam comes back to bite us because after we use Thunderbolt, Lapras's Hydro Pump knocks us out. Then unfortunately the next battle goes even worse, because the Dugong uses Aurora Beam before going down, then Cloyster survives the Thunderbolt range and gets off a clamp to bring us into red. Then, although Slowbro doesn't deal any damage, I actually misclick on Jinx and continue spamming Thunderbolt, allowing it to knock us out with Ice Punch. But realistically, that misclick didn't even matter, because Lapras still would have knocked us out anyway. But then finally, on the third attempt, we get a run in which Dugong uses Rest, then we get the range on the Cloyster, then Slowbro doesn't attack, allowing us to go into Lapras at full health. So then Thunderbolt brings Lapras to half, then we tank Lapras's Blizzard in the yellow and knock it out on the next turn. Then against Bruno, I learned from my previous mistake and used a special move in the form of Surf instead of Earthquake against Hitmonchan, and we one-shot the team except Machamp, who just uses a submission that does very little before going down, and then, even though Nidoqueen is just a little slower than Nidoking, we still managed to outspeed all of Agatha's team for the flawless victory against her, and we managed to outspeed Lance's Gyarados to one-shot it as well. Then against the Dragonairs, I thought I would be a little clever and use Earthquake against them instead of the super effective Blizzard, just because they can't attack us anyway, so I tried to save the Blizzard power points just in case it missed. But then that actually wastes a little bit of time because Earthquake two-shots the first Dragonair, and then against a second Dragonair, Lance actually heals with a Hyper Potion, forcing us to use 2 more Earthquakes to take it down. But still, a free win is a free win, and we go into Aerodactyl at full health, who again just uses a weak takedown before going down to Blizzard, followed by Dragonite for a Lance split of 47 minutes and 9 seconds. So, how do our competitors compare going into the last battle of the run? Well, it's not looking good for Nidoking. Nidoqueen is still ahead by over 2 minutes, which means that even if Nidoking wins on his first attempt at the champion, Nidoqueen could still lose an entire battle and still have enough time to win the race if she wins her second attempt at the champion. Well, let's see how Nidoking does. To start, Blizzard one-shots Pidgeot, and I wasn't sure if we would outspeed the Alakazam, but we do, and it goes down to Earthquake. Then Surf one-shots Rhydon, Thunderbolt one-shots Gyarados, Earthquake one-shots Arcanine, then as usual Blizzard doesn't quite one-shot Venusaur, but it does get a freeze, allowing us to knock it out on the next turn for the first attempt victory at the champion. Alright Nidoking, you have a shot, but it all depends on Nidoqueen's performance in this last bout. Well, to begin the fight, Nidoqueen doesn't get off to a great start because Blizzard misses on Pidgeot, who then uses Mirror Move to use a Blizzard of its own, which then freezes. And in Gen 1, since Pokemon have no chance of thawing unless they're hit with a Fire move, a freeze is functionally equivalent to a knockout, so we have to reset. Alright Nidoqueen, you can't afford many more of those. You have to step up your game if you want to win this. Then in the next attempt, we again open with Blizzard on Pidgeot, only to find out the knockout was actually a range because Pidgeot survives on a sliver and retaliates with a weak wing attack before going down on the next turn. Then, just like with Nidoking, we outspeed and one-shot Alakazam in spite of our lower speed in comparison to Nidoking. Then the same for Rhydon, Gyarados, and Arcanine. Then, you guessed it, Venusaur survives Blizzard, gets off a Razor Leaf, and then goes down to Earthquake in the next turn for the second attempt victory. Results. Nidoking completed the game in 3 hours and 17 minutes game time, 50 minutes and 39 seconds real time, while Nidoqueen finished the game in 3 hours and 8 minutes game time, 48 minutes and 43 seconds real time, winning the race by a total of 1 minute and 56 seconds. During this run, Nidoqueen's superior starting moveset against Brock allowed her to begin the race with a substantial lead that Nidoking was never able to recover from. Granted, there were certain small advantages that allowed Nidoking to gain some ground in some areas, but it was never enough to make up for the deficit. Additionally, you might be thinking that it was unfair that Nidoqueen went into Lorelei with rare candies on the first attempt, where Nidoking had to experiment with Lorelei a single time to determine that that was necessary. But Nidoking's first attempt at Lorelei at his lower level only took around 50 seconds, which means that even if we discounted that time, Nidoqueen would still win by over a minute. So today, we're crowning Nidoqueen as the true queen of Pokemon challenges. But remember, we also have a second crown up for grabs, which will be awarded to the Pokemon who can complete the game the fastest after we've optimized their runs. So now, let's run our competitors through some tests. Specifically, there are 4 areas where I predict we'll be able to shave off a bit of time, the first of which is the Brock split. That is to say, it's entirely possible that we went into Brock overleveled, and with either Nidoking or Nidoqueen we could potentially face him at a lower level and still maintain the ability to beat him consistently. So with Nidoqueen, we played through the first part of the game battling 0 wild encounters and only the mandatory trainers necessary to get to Pewter City, bringing us to level 7. And even though I'm pretty sure we won't be able to win at this level, I still want to try the battle at the lowest level and then work my way up from there, just to keep our method as scientific as possible. And in the battle, we actually do manage to get past the Geodude because Body Slam paralyzed a total of 5 times, and since we're so underleveled, we actually bypass level 8 entirely, and Geodude jumps us straight to level 9 going into Onix. But even then, it's abundantly clear that this is not going to work. So, we go out and defeat one more trainer who brings us to level 9, and it turns out that we can actually consistently beat Geodude at this level, but then the Onix still outspeeds, and our Body Slam is still only doing a blip. So, we have to reset. So we go out and train again, and the next trainer bumps us up to level 11, which is actually the key to victory against Brock, because after we get past Geodude, that levels us up to level 12, which allows us to outspeed the Onix, meaning that we can now use Tail Whip during the Onix's bide without fear of its retaliation attack. And just a quick note here about the way that I perform these tests. Anytime I wanted to test the consistency of a certain strategy, I would run that strategy 5 times in a row. If I won all 5 times, I would deem the strategy consistent enough to use. If I won 3 times or fewer, I deemed it too inconsistent to use. If I won exactly 4 times, I would run the strategy another 5 times, and if I won all 5 of those, the strategy would pass the test. And it turns out that with Nidoqueen, going into Geodude at level 11, then leveling up to level 12, is just enough for her to win 5 times in a row, meaning that Nidoqueen will be able to save time by cutting out 1 battle prior to Brock. Then in Nidoking's case, we started the testing at level 11, and at this level, Geodude's defenses are just barely too great to get past before a Geodude knocks us out. Then at level 12, we just barely make it past a Geodude, and we also outspeed the Onix so we can use Poison Sting during the bide turns, but still, Geodude gets us down to such little health that the Onix battle is even then not feasible. Then level 13 gets us a little closer, but still it's the same story. At level 14, however, is where the odds tip in our favor because we were able to tank Geodude's attacks and deal just enough damage to Onix to win 9 out of 10 times. So considering that Nidoking went in at level 15 in the previous run, that will save him quite a bit of time by cutting out all that extra training in Viridian Forest. Then the second area of potential optimization is against Misty, because in both of the previous runs, we were so afraid of Misty that we skipped the battle entirely and instead chose to complete the SSN mission first, which ultimately required us to waste time by backtracking to defeat Lieutenant Surge later in the game. But what if we can actually defeat Misty sooner, thus making the backtracking unnecessary? Well, with Nidoqueen, after completing Nugget Bridge, that puts us going into Misty at level 23, and at that level, Body Slam is arranged to knock out the Staryu, allowing it to get off a water gun before going down, and even though we would sometimes get good paralysis luck on either the Staryu or Starmie, we still won the fight only 3 out of 5 times, which is a majority of the time, but is still way less consistent than I'm comfortable with. However, after completing Nugget Bridge, there is still one more mandatory trainer, the Rocket guarding the exit of Cerulean City, that we can battle before Misty to level us up to 24. But it turns out that even at level 24, Body Slam is still arranged to knock out the Staryu, and Starmie's Bubble Beam is just too formidable to get past. So, unfortunately, it looks like Nidoqueen is stuck with the same backtracking route that she did on the first run. Nidoking, however, thanks to his earlier training in preparation for Brock, gets to Misty at 1 higher level. And plus, Nidoking has a higher attack stat, and an attacking move in the form of Thrash that has 5 higher base power than Body Slam. So, in Nidoking's case, that might be just enough to make the difference. Let's see. Well, to start, Thrash is enough to one-shot the Staryu, so we never have to worry about the Staryu's water gun like we did with Nidoqueen. And against Starmie, Thrash is a favorable range to 2-shot because we battled Starmie 10 times, and we took it down in 2 attacks in 8 of them, and of those we won every attempt. attempt. Then in one of the remaining 2 attempts, Starmie survived the second thrash and knocked us out, and in the other attempt, Starmie also survived the second thrash, but we still came through with the victory regardless. So, that makes 9 out of 10 successful attempts. That's good enough for me, which means that in future runs, Nidoking will be able to gain some time against Nidoqueen by taking a more direct walking path through Vermilion City when it comes time to defeat Lieutenant Surge. Then the next long stretch of the game is such a breeze for both Nidoking and Nidoqueen that there isn't any optimization to be found here. That is, until we make it to the Cinnabar Gym, where in the previous run we knocked out all the gym trainers for extra experience. But what if all that extra training is entirely unnecessary, and we can actually sweep the game without those extra couple levels? And more importantly, what if only one of our contestants gets a benefit from that training where the other one doesn't? For example, if Nidoking needs the training where Nidoqueen doesn't, that might be enough to take away any hope that Nidoking could possibly have had to pull ahead, but if Nidoqueen needs the training where Nidoking doesn't, that could seal the deal for Nidoking's path to victory. So the first thing to do is to consistency test Blaine at the lower level, and as you might have guessed, he's still not a problem for either Pokemon, because just like in the first run, the first 3 members of his team are outsped in 1-shot, and Arcanine is still outsped in 2-shot. Granted, I did discover that it's possible to lose to a critical hit Fire Blast, but that's extremely unlikely because Arcanine is only about 1 in 4 to use Fire Blast, and about 1 in 5 to critical hit. Then up next is Rival 5, and even though Pidgeot is still annoyingly arranged to KO with Blizzard, with Nidoqueen and Nidoking we managed to sweep the team 5 times in a row, just like in the first run. Then against Sabrina, with both Nidoking and Nidoqueen we find that without the extra levels, we no longer outspeed the Alakazam, but we do one-shot it, and fortunately its most powerful move in the form of Psybeam is not enough to get the knockout. And even though this never happened during the consistency testing, I am still aware that Psybeam could cause confusion or get a critical hit, which would of course result in a reset. But just like the critical hit Fire Blast from Arcanine, that's not actually that likely, so I still deemed this battle safe enough to go into without the extra training. However, we then go into Rival 6, and in this battle, although the first 4 Pokemon in the form of Pidgeot, Rhyhorn, Gyarados, and Growlithe are no trouble at all, just like against Sabrina we don't outspeed the Alakazam. But unlike Sabrina's Alakazam, the rival's Alakazam knows Psychic, meaning that it will easily knock us out given the chance. So I have a choice here. Either we can go out and train to a higher level, or we can feed some rare candies. And in this case, I decide to go ahead and feed Nidoking our rare candies, simply because the entire point of this test is to determine if the training in Blaine's gym is necessary. So going out to do even more training now would defeat the purpose. Now granted, I was a little hesitant because generally speaking, you want to save your rare candies until as late as possible to maximize the experience you gain from them. But in the previous run, we had to use our rare candies at Lorelei, and now we're using them only 1 battle sooner. So in this case, it actually doesn't make all that much of a difference. Plus, if it helps to make the battle more consistent, I'd say it's only logical to use them here. And so after feeding the rare candies, that turns this battle into a complete triviality because now we outspeed and one-shot everything except for Venusaur, who goes down in 2 hits, allowing us to move on to Lorelei. And spoiler alert, it turns out that Lorelei is where our consistency testing stops, because although the first 4 Pokemon on Lorelei's team don't play out any differently than they did in the first run, now that we're at a lower level, Lapras is just barely a 3-shot with Thunderbolt, whereas previously it was just barely a 2-shot. And so after winning only 2 out of 5 times against Lapras, I decided right then that in all future runs, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen would spend the extra minute and a half to sweep through the Cinnabar gym trainers so we could go into Lorelei at 2 levels higher. So now at this point, that's all the testing there is to be done. So let's head into round 2 of this race and see just how much our contestants can improve. Well, this time we start with Nidoqueen since Nidoking is now the underdog, and against Brock, although we previously determined that Nidoqueen could win at level 11, we go into this battle at level 12 just from having knocked out a couple extra wild encounters. And a quick point about this battle that I didn't mention last time, against Geodude you actually want it to spam Tackle rather than Defense Curl, because we open with Tail Whip, which is a net neutral exchange with Defense Curl, causing us to have to use Tail Whip again, wasting time. But also, if Geodude opens with a few Defense Curls and then switches to Tackle, you actually end up taking far more damage than if Geodude had just opened with Tackle in the first place, because then it takes far longer to knock out the Geodude, giving it more opportunities to attack. But luckily in this fight, Geodude never once uses Defense Curl, allowing us to knock it out with 1 Tail Whip and only 5 Body Slams. Then we get pretty much the best luck ever against Onix, because it opens with Bide, allowing us to get off a full 4 Tail Whips before we start attacking. Then between a Tackle Miss, a Screech, and another Bide, Onix never actually damages us a single time before going down to only 4 Body Slams, placing Nidoqueen's round 2 Brock split at 3 minutes and 15 seconds, 17 seconds faster than in round 1. But then as Nidoking goes into Brock, he actually has more room to improve, because the time that it took him in round 1 to level up from 14 to 15 was much greater than the time Nidoqueen saved by skipping the couple trainers that she did. So, just like before, all we have to do is spam Horn Attack against Geodude, allowing us to go into Onix at half health. Then, since we still outspeed Onix even at level 14, we just switch to Poison Sting when it uses Bide, then use Horn Attack for the rest of the time, allowing us to knock out the Onix with red health remaining, and placing Nidoking's round 2 Brock split at 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Exactly 1 minute faster than in round 1. So, moving on to Route 3 leading to Cerulean City, Nidoqueen still has a sizable lead, but a smaller lead than she did in the first round. And unfortunately for Nidoqueen, everything up to the SSN mission goes just as smoothly as it did in round 1, but then in the battle against Rival 3, the opening Pidgeotto survives Nidoqueen's Body Slam and gets off a Sand Attack. Then our next 3 attacks miss, while Pidgeotto chips down our health and then gets off yet another Sand Attack. Well, in the previous run, neither Nidoqueen nor Nidoking got Sand Attacked a single time during the entire playthrough, so it looks like now Nidoqueen's luck has run out, because although our next attack takes out Pidgeotto, against Raticate we miss a total of 5 consecutive attacks, allowing Raticate to chip away at our health for Nidoqueen's first reset. And although in the next attempt we do avoid the Sand Attack for the decisive victory, that really does not bode well for Nidoqueen's time. Then against Misty, just like last time we take out Staryu no problem, but then Starmie's first Bubble Beam gets a speed drop, allowing Starmie to attack first in the next turn with a Water Gun that comes close to knocking us out, but then we survive and take out the Starmie in the next turn. So, with Nidoqueen just barely dodging another reset, she sweeps her way through the next portion of the game with ease, and defeats Rival 4 in 21 minutes and 35 seconds. So now, let's check in on Nidoking and see how he handles his new and improved routing from Cerulean City to Lavender Town. Because remember, unlike Nidoqueen, Nidoking is powerful enough to consistently defeat Misty immediately after completing Nugget Bridge, making his walking path across the map much more efficient. Well, in the battle against Misty, Thrash is more than enough to one-shot the Staryu, and also deals just over half to Starmie. However, Starmie's retaliatory Bubble Beam again gets a speed drop, allowing Misty to brace Starmie with the next defend before our next attack, thus allowing Starmie to survive in the red, and get off another Bubble Beam to bring us into the red. Well, this is not good news, because now Thrash could potentially wear off and inflict confusion, but fortunately Thrash lasts for one more turn and knocks out the Starmie. So, with that bullet dodged, Nidoking also steamrolls his way through the next portion of the game, defeating Rival 3 on the first attempt unlike Nidoqueen, then defeating Rival 4 at 22 minutes and 27 seconds. And although Rival 4 is not whatsoever a challenge for either Nidoking or Nidoqueen, the Rival 4 split is still a good benchmark to compare the times of our contestants, because Nidoking's routing diverged from Nidoqueen's routing, starting with Misty in Cerulean City. And the battle against Rival 4 is where the two Pokemon's routings converge again, and indeed remain identical for the rest of the game. So at this point Nidoking is still behind, but has gained some serious ground, and only trails Nidoqueen by less than a single minute. Whereas in the round 1 Rival 4 split, Nidoking trailed by just over a minute, meaning that Nidoking's time from round 1 to round 2 has improved more than Nidoqueen's. Then, as you might suspect, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen continue on to dominate the rest of the game leading up to the Elite Four, with only a handful of exceptions that waste a little bit of time. For example, in Nidoking's case, the battle against Koga goes exactly our way until Weezing's Self Destruct gets a critical hit, causing a reset that wastes about 25 seconds before surviving the Self Destruct on the next attempt. And in Nidoqueen's case, the exact same thing happens against Sabrina's Alakazam, who knocks us out with a critical hit Psybeam to waste 20 seconds before winning the next attempt. Then in the battle against Rival 5, this time it's Nidoking's turn to share Nidoqueen's fate from the Rival 3 battle, because Nidoking opens by missing Blizzard against Pidgeot, who then retaliates with Sand Attack. And although the next Blizzard lands to knock out the Pidgeot, followed by Gyarados, Growlithe, and Alakazam, Venusaur survives our first attack as usual and then hits us with Leech Seed. Then our next 3 Earthquakes miss, while Venusaur continues to chip away at our health, and it was at this point that I was kicking myself for not having healed before this fight, because now we're out of Earthquake power points and only have a single Blizzard left. So if this next Blizzard doesn't land, that'll be a wrap because Venusaur resists both Thunderbolt and Surf. So we go for Blizzard, it misses, and now the writing is on the wall and we have to reset, wasting a full 43 seconds thanks to how long we spent trying to knock out the Venusaur. Then up next, for both Nidoking and Nidoqueen, the rest of the game leading up to the Elite Four is totally seamless with 0 resets. So let's check where our competitors stand as they complete Victory Road and head on to Indigo Plateau. So as of now, Nidoqueen leads the race by a mere 19 seconds. However, now it's down to the wire because up next is Lorelei, who is far and away the least consistent battle in the game, meaning that as neck and neck as this race is, the winner will likely come down to who gets luckier against Lorelei and defeats her in fewer attempts. Well, since Nidoking is the underdog, we'll start with him. In the first attempt against Lorelei, we open with a super clutch critical hit Thunderbolt against Dugong to knock it out on the first turn. Then, although Thunderbolt doesn't quite knock out Cloyster, it does paralyze to prevent Cloyster from attacking before before going down. Then Slowbro uses Amnesia instead of attacking before going down. Then Jinx is one-shot as usual, meaning we go into Lapras at full health. Then against Lapras, our first Thunderbolt gets a critical hit that doesn't knock it out, but it does paralyze. However, unlike Cloyster, Lapras powers through the paralysis and gets off a devastating Hydro Pump. But it's not enough, and Lapras goes down in the next turn, which is fantastic news for Nidoking, because that's exactly the kind of result that he needs to have a chance at winning this round. Then after Lorelei, Bruno, Agatha, and Lance are all as trivial as they were the first time, placing Nidoking's Lance split at 45 minutes and 13 seconds. So, let's see how Nidoqueen does against Lorelei. To start, Dewgong takes only half from Thunderbolt and then retaliates with Aurora Beam before going down. Then we get the range on Cloyster to one-shot it, then get a critical hit against Slowbro for the one-shot. Then, because Dewgong's Aurora Beam also dropped our attack, Earthquake against Jinx only brings it into red. But luckily Lorelei just uses a Super Potion before Jinx goes down in the next turn. However, Lapras then survives Thunderbolt and knocks us out with Blizzard. And now we're against the ropes. If we get one more reset, I think that'll be a wrap for Nidoqueen. In the next battle, Dewgong again hits us with Aurora Beam, causing us to go into Lapras at less than full health. And after our first Thunderbolt brings Lapras to half health, Lapras uses Hydro Pump and Nidoqueen hangs on by a mere 6 hit points. But then our next Thunderbolt also leaves Lapras surviving on just a sliver, and then although Lapras could knock us out, Lorelei just uses a Super Potion, and one more Thunderbolt gets the job done. Wow, talk about a nail-biter. Then upon Nidoqueen's defeat of Bruno, Agatha, and Lance, that leaves Nidoqueen with a Lance split of 45 minutes and 47 seconds, meaning that Nidoking is now ahead by all of 14 seconds. Alright folks, this is it. Who will come out on top in round 2? Let's find out. To start with Nidoking, we open with Blizzard against Pidgeot, who survives in the red, and then uses Mirror Move on Blizzard, which fortunately misses. Then Pidgeot goes down in the next turn, after which we proceed to outspeed and one-shot Alakazam, followed by Rhydon, Gyarados, and Arcanine. And then Venusaur is two-shot for the first attempt victory. And now obviously Nidoqueen's strategy is exactly identical to Nidoking's, so let's see how this battle turns out. Well, just like with Nidoking, Blizzard comes just shy of knocking out the Pidgeot, who just uses a Whirlwind before going down. And then, we don't outspeed the Alakazam? Well, that's really unfortunate, because that allows Alakazam to get off a devastating Psychic to bring us into yellow, and also drop our special. Then Alakazam goes down to Earthquake, and then Rhydon goes down to Surf, but because of our weakened special, we don't one-shot the Gyarados. Then Gyarados could have knocked us out, except that a Hydro Pump misses, allowing us to take it out in the next turn. Then we outspeed and one-shot the Arcanine, but since we don't one-shot Venusaur, its Razor Leaf takes what little health we had left, and we get knocked out. So now, finishing this run will just be a matter of resetting until Alakazam uses some other move that deals less damage than Psychic. Well, in the second attempt, Alakazam gets a critical hit Psychic for the knockout. Then in the third attempt, Psychic brings us into red, and even though Venusaur's Mega Drain doesn't quite finish us off, our next Blizzard misses, allowing Venusaur to knock us out on the next turn. Then in the fourth attempt, Alakazam goes for Psybeam to deal about half and also confuse us, but luckily we snap out of confusion right away and sweep through the team as planned. Well, not the most glorious victory of all time, but at least we got there eventually. So, in round 2 of the race, Nidoqueen completed the game in 49 minutes and 6 seconds, and Nidoking completed the game in 46 minutes and 30 seconds, meaning that Nidoking wins round 2 by a substantial 2 minutes and 36 seconds, mostly due to Nidoqueen's 1 reset against Lorelei and 3 resets against the champion thanks to the Alakazam outspeeding. However, I'm still not satisfied with that result, because although I'm confident that Nidoking's time was fairly close to optimal, I'm also confident that Nidoqueen's time was nowhere near optimal, principally because I know exactly why Nidoqueen didn't outspeed the Alakazam in round 2, where she did in round 1, and it's a problem that can easily be avoided. You see, a component of Nidoqueen's round 1 run that I didn't mention in the moment is that while traversing through Pokemon Mansion, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen were so underleveled that occasionally wild encounters would spawn in spite of our repels. And since most of the wild Pokemon in the mansion are either poison or fire types that are weak to Earthquake, we would one-shot the Pokemon instead of running from the encounter, just because running versus one-shotting take about the same amount of time, so if you come across a wild Pokemon in that scenario, you may as well just gain the experience. However, in round 2, it just so happens that Nidoqueen didn't get any wild encounters in the mansion, where she got 4 encounters in round 1, making the difference of exactly 1 level going into the Elite Four, and apparently that 1 level is what made the difference between outspeeding the Alakazam versus not. So, in light of that fact, let's go for round 3, this time being sure to have Nidoqueen gain just a touch more experience, so she can match Nidoking's level going into the league. Well, this time around, Nidoqueen beats Brock 17 seconds slower than in round 2, ironically identical identical to her round 1 Brock split of 3 minutes and 32 seconds, putting her 1 minute and 56 seconds ahead of Nidoking's round 3 Brock split of 5 minutes and 28 seconds. So, as usual, Nidoking has some catching up to do, but it actually turns out that in this particular run, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen get absolutely pristine luck, which is fantastic because it means that our comparison between the two will be extremely accurate. For example, both competitors avoided Sand Attack from Pidgeotto and Pidgeot when facing against rivals 2 through 5, and both competitors avoided any critical hits from either Koga's Weezing or Sabrina's Alakazam, and both competitors even got the exact same number of wild encounters in Mount Moon, and for the cherry on top, when searching for the HM mules to use Fly, Cut, Strength, and Dig, both competitors even managed to get both Spearow and Sandshrew to spawn in the first and second wild encounters respectively. Looking back, it really was as if this run was custom built to compare both Nidoking and Nidoqueen at their peak performance. However, it turns out that only remained true until the Elite Four, because we all know that Lorelei is the one trainer who can make or break these runs. So, now knowing that the rest of the run prior to the Elite Four went so smoothly, let's skip ahead to the battle against Lorelei and see how our competitors stack up. Starting with Nidoking, we open with a Thunderbolt that paralyzes Dewgong, after which Dewgong luckily goes for rest instead of Aurora Beam, allowing us to take it out while it's still sleeping. Then we miss the range on Cloyster, who brings us to about 3/4 health with Aurora Beam before going down. Then we fortunately get past Slowbro and Jinx without taking any more damage. Then after the initial Thunderbolt against Lapras, it goes for Hydro Pump, which we survive on a mere 10 health. Then we knock out the Lapras in the next turn for the first attempt victory. Then, as expected, we sweep through the rest of the league without a hitch, meaning that Nidoking finishes round 3 with a grand total of 0 resets. Absolutely incredible. But will Nidoqueen be so fortunate? Let's see. Well, against the opening Dewgong, it does unfortunately go for Aurora Beam instead of Rest, and then we do manage to sweep through Cloyster, Slowbro, and Jinx without taking any additional damage. However, after we use the initial Thunderbolt against Lapras, its Hydro Pump is just barely enough to knock us out, forcing our first reset of the run. Then in that moment, I actually made a decision that, to save time, we would just immediately reset without even attempting the rest of the fight if Dewgong ever used Aurora Beam. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what happens on the second attempt, prompting yet another reset. But then on the third attempt, we get a critical hit on the Dewgong to one-shot it, followed by a critical hit on Cloyster for the one-shot as well. Then, although Slowbro does hit us with a water gun before going down, that still leaves us with enough HP to tank Lapras' Blizzard and knock it out with one final Thunderbolt for the win. And then I'm sure you've already guessed that, yes, just like Nidoking, Nidoqueen also sweeps the rest of the Elite Four, leaving her with a grand total of 2 resets. So, where does that leave us for our competitors' final scores? Let's take a look. In round 3, Nidoking finished the game in 45 minutes and 31 seconds, and Nidoqueen finished the game in 45 minutes and 2 seconds. Both absolutely top-tier times, with Nidoqueen just barely coming out on top by only 29 seconds, meaning that for the second time in a row, we're crowning her the true queen of Pokemon challenges. And in case you needed any further convincing, in this run, Nidoqueen had more resets than Nidoking due to getting worse luck against Lorelei, and she still won, meaning that she most definitely deserves her victory. However, both competitors in today's race put up an absolutely stellar performance, and should be proud to represent the pinnacle of what it means to be a solo-run Pokemon. Both Nidoking and Nidoqueen are absolute powerhouses that, unlike most other high-tier Pokemon, don't even need to bother with setup moves, and instead relied almost exclusively on simply brute forcing their way past any problem by attacking for super effective damage, literally the only exception being Nidoqueen's Tail Whip against Brock. When comparing the two Pokemon side by side, it was immediately clear that Nidoqueen gained a massive advantage from the Brock split, and that there was no single point in the entire run where Nidoking could make up that lost time. So if he wanted to win, he would have to catch up in small increments rather than in one fell swoop. And granted, he did find a handful of ways to do that, among them being avoiding the Poké Centers, one-shotting all the Pokemon in the early game, and taking a more efficient walking path through Vermilion City. But unfortunately for Nidoking, all those small advantages didn't accumulate quite enough to pull ahead. But nevertheless, I think it should go without saying that, given their high base stat totals and access to such diverse and powerful move pools, thus allowing them to breeze past all manner of challenges that came their way, both Nidoking and Nidoqueen have obviously earned their place well into the S tier for Pokemon solo challenges in Gen 1, even managing to usurp our former record holder Poliwhirl. And in case you were wondering, the tier list represents the times for the Pokemon's first attempts only, which means that neither Nidoking nor Nidoqueen even had to work to get to the top 2 slots of the leaderboard. That's how powerful they are. After running so many other Pokemon that slog their way through so many different portions of the game, it's extremely refreshing once in a while just to sit back and watch two titans approach the absolute limit of what Pokemon solo challenge runs can be. Thank you all so much for joining along with me on this adventure together, and thank you so much for all your kind words and continued appreciation for the channel. As always, before you leave, be sure to like, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell to be notified of new installments. And feel free to support the channel on Patreon. See you next time everyone, take care.